Women from all over the world mobilized for International Women's Day to demand greater equality and protest sexist violence. In Greece, thousands of workers took to the streets to join a new day of protests after last week's tragic train accident that left 57 people dead. And also, mourners gathered in the Palestinian city of Jenin to mourn 5 people killed during an Israeli raid in the Jenin refugee camp. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And in a day of commemoration and not celebration, women from all over the world mobilized for International Women's Day to demand greater equality and protest sexist violence. As every March the 8th, women were taken to the streets from Kabul to Bangkok on Wednesday to mark International Women's Day and to highlight the relevance of their struggles and the ongoing fight for their rights. Among the claims that are echoed worldwide is the continuous denouncement of gender inequality and sexist violence. In an increasingly unequal world system, women's demands are not strange to the struggles of each nation, but rather aim to uncover the inherent violence of a system that's most cruel with the most vulnerable. Equal access to labor market, education, abortion, and reproductive rights, along with the acknowledgement of women's unpaid work, that's to say domestic labor, the care of children and the elderly, are some of the claims being echoed worldwide. We stay on topic. In Tokyo, Japan, over 100 women took to the streets to protest violence against women and demand gender equality.
Against women is a problem in people's minds. It could be treated lightly unless we have a law that clearly bans discrimination. This is something that needs a political fix, and it's our voices that will help make this political change. So I'm here to express my voice today.
For their part, Indonesian women gathered outside Parliament building, focusing their claims around the need for a long-awaited bill to protect domestic workers.
Today, domestic workers are facing difficulties in protecting their rights, such as violence, unpaid salaries, or other mistreatment by the employers or agents, even becoming victims of human trafficking.
In Jordan, women activists held a protest on Wednesday outside the United Nations office in Amman to show solidarity with Palestinian women who are facing hardships under Israeli occupation in the West Bank.
This is an important day for the women of the world. We must highlight the most important issue facing us. The most important issue facing us is the crimes committed against Palestinian women and against the Palestinian people. Such crimes are unprecedented, even in South Africa or elsewhere, when extremists seize power and then they burn villages, they burn houses and demolish them, and then executions become permissible in the law, and this is what we are protesting against today. We stand with the Palestinian women.
In Pakistan, thousands of women also participated in rallies in their struggle for gender equality, despite the efforts by authorities in several cities to block the marches. Known as the Aurat, or Women's March, the protests address issues such as security and safety for women, divorce, sexual harassment, and menstruation. Meanwhile, authorities in some cities refused to provide security for demonstrations held ahead of International Women's Day, despite allowing a counter-march to go ahead before a court ordered them to back down. Also in Afghanistan, several women gathered in Kabul to demand for their rights, harshly restricted by the Taliban government in the past month. The United Nations mission in the country has called it the world's most repressive nation for women and girls. In this sense, UN mission head Rosa Otunbayeva said the Taliban, who seized control of the country in August 2021, have demonstrated a focus on imposing rules that leave most women and girls trapped in their homes. She also said that doing so is not only an act of national self-harm, but condemns generations to come to a life of poverty. Her statements came a few days after universities resumed lectures following the winter break, but without their female students. In this context, Afghan women continue to gather and demand an equal access to work and education.
We all gathered here for our demands, and we all have the same demand. The school doors must be reopened, and we should use our inalienable right to have a self-sufficient and good country. As God has himself said, education is obligatory for men and women, and this is an inalienable right for all of us. And I request from the caretaker government that we all be able to use our inalienable rights.
Meanwhile, in Latin America and the Caribbean, people commemorate International Women's Day with different activities and mobilizations. In Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, a protest led by the organization Women in Defense of Democracy took place to protest feminicides, gender violence, and to demand the legalization of abortion. Meanwhile, in Chile, major events are held with the participation of female artists such as Camila Moreno, TeleSUR and Juanita Parra. Also, the national coordinator in Guatemala celebrates the important date demanding justice for the 41 girls who were burned to death in the Virgen de la Asunción home due to state negligence in 2017. And also, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has announced a series of measures in favor of women's rights, including a bill to guarantee equal pay for men and women holding the same positions. The bill is the result of Brazilian women's struggle and demands. The measure, promoted by the leader of the Workers' Party, is a campaign promise that had the support of then candidate and now planning minister Simón Tebet. President Lula had announced the bill at a meeting with authorities at the National Food Security Council at the Planalto Palace on February 28th. On several occasions, Brazilian authorities have denounced that although there is legislation to promote equality in the country, the issue has too many nuances that prevent it from becoming a concrete reality, and therefore a law should be enacted to decree that women should earn the same salary as men for the same job. Let's take a short break, but first, remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In Greece, thousands of workers took to the streets to join a new day of protests against the train transportation authorities after the tragic train accident that took place last week in the country and left 57 people dead. After protests over the past 3 days across the country, some 10,000 students, railway workers, and groups affiliated with left-wing parties gathered in Athens' Syntagma Square to express sympathy for the lives lost and to demand better safety standards on the rail network. Railway workers, who also lost colleagues in the accident, have staged rotating walkouts since Wednesday to denounce cost-cutting and underinvestment in the rail infrastructure, a legacy of Greece's debilitating debt crisis from 2010 to 2018. And in the capital city of Tbilisi, Georgia, citizens demonstrated against the law on foreign agents. The mobilizations are taking place following the approval, with 76 votes in favor and 13 against, of the bill on transparency of foreign influence. According to the law, any organization that receives more than 20% of its funding from abroad should be qualified as an agent for foreign influence. Demonstrators claim that with the adoption of this law, Georgia will separate from Europe, while at the same time they denounce repression by police officers. In response, the country's Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili argued that certain organizations in the Eurasian nation have used irregular funds donated from abroad to hold anti-government rallies and provocative actions. Now we move on to other topics. The Russian Defense Ministry reported that 90 Russians who were being held captive by Ukrainian forces as war prisoners were returned on Tuesday from Ukrainian-controlled territory to Russia. The return comes after a process of negotiations with Kiev. The agency said the servicemen were in mortal danger while in captivity. According to the ministry, the released soldiers will be taken to Moscow to undergo rehabilitation in medical centers and are receiving the necessary psychological and medical assistance. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, confirmed on Tuesday that it will hold a meeting between Turkey, Sweden and Finland next Thursday to unblock the entry of the two Nordic countries into the war-mongering alliance. The meeting, to be held at NATO headquarters in Brussels, will take place after Hungary, which also opposes membership, begins parliamentary debates on the issue to ratify or not its position. Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of the alliance, announced the meeting at the press conference together with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson from Stockholm. The Turkish government opposes the entry of Sweden and Finland into NATO because it accuses their governments of lack of cooperation in their fight against political activists of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, whom Ankara describes as terrorists. On Monday, Chinese President Xi Jinping publicly criticized the U.S. and its allies for their attempts to contain China by threatening its development during the first session of the 14th National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. Referring to the past 5 years of the Chinese Communist Party's rule, Xi indicated that they have been extremely unusual and extraordinary. Xi pointed out that the external conditions for China's development changed drastically with a significant increase in uncertain and unpredictable factors, especially as Western countries, led by the U.S., subjected China to an unprecedented and unpredictable economic crisis. Researchers at the U.S. think that Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft believe that this is the first time Xi Jinping has publicly come out and declared that the U.S. is taking such actions against China. TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Mourners gathered on Wednesday in the West Bank city of Jenin to mourn 5 Palestinians killed during an Israeli raid in the Jenin refugee camp. On Tuesday, Palestinian health officials said the Israeli army raided a home in a refugee camp in the occupied West Bank, triggering a battle that killed at least 6 Palestinians and wounded more than 2,000 others. The military said that one of those killed in the Jenin refugee camp was the suspected assailant behind a fatal shooting of 2 Israeli brothers in the northern West Bank town of Hawara last week. An Israeli police spokesperson said 3 Israeli soldiers were in fair to serious conditions after being shot and wounded in Tuesday's firefight in Jenin. The Jenin Brigade, a loosely organized armed group based in the Jenin camp, said its militants shot and hurled explosive devices at Israeli soldiers. Egypt's health ministry said on early Wednesday that 4 people died and 23 others were injured north of Cairo when a passenger train crashed into a station platform and derailed. According to an official report, 18 passengers were taken to Qaylub Specialty Hospital, 3 others to the Central Charity Center, and 2 others had been transferred to the Nasser Institute Hospital in Cairo. The Ministry of Transport said the accident happened in Qaylub on Tuesday evening after the train did not respond to a traffic light signal, sending it crashing onto the buffer stop at the train station and derailing. Transport Minister Kamel El Wazir said a committee has been formed to investigate the accident. In the meantime, the country's Minister of Social Solidarity said it will offer the equivalent of $3,254 to the families of those killed. On Tuesday, Kenya's Ministry of Health announced the extension of the use of the world's first malaria vaccine in the lake endemic region. The decision follows Kenya National Immunization Technical Advisory Group's recommendations, as well as that of the World Health Organization. Kenya is one of the 3 countries, together with Ghana and Malawi, where the FTS malaria vaccine is already in use, following the 2019 pilot tests in parts of the country. Since then, Kenya has provided more than 1 million doses of the 4-dose malaria vaccine to children across 8 counties. According to the Kenya's Ministry of Health, near 400,000 children have received at least 1 dose of the vaccine.
We have so far vaccinated close to 400,000 children. In Vihiga County alone, at least 25,000 children have been vaccinated against malaria. Within these areas, there has been a substantial reduction in deadly severe malaria, a drop in child hospitalizations, and a reduction in child deaths.
And attacks between the army and the M23 rebels continue in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, despite the ceasefire declared between the 2 sides on March the 3rd. According to humanitarian and hospital sources, fighting between the army and the M23 had resumed on Monday morning on the northern and southern fronts of North Kivu province, despite the ceasefire, leaving several civilians dead and wounded. Both sides accuse each other of launching attacks against their positions. These confrontations come after the recent announcement of the failure of all regional initiatives launched to stop the M23 advance in North Kivu. And a report by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, warned about maternal malnutrition in at least 10 African countries. The document warns that during the first quarter of the year, some 6.9 million adolescents, pregnant and breastfeeding women suffer from acute malnutrition, an increase from the 5.5 million during the same period in 2020. Among the most affected countries, UNICEF pointed out Burkina Faso, Chad, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, and Kenya. The international organization warned that in recent decades, nutritional inequality has worsened, leading to a global nutrition crisis among adolescent females. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But before our farewells, we want to share with you a tribute to Shirley Chisholm, a champion of Black women's rights, performed by Rhythm Tribe and with the choreography of Aisha Dayo. Remember to find us in our socials. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
The trip took 9 days on the rough Atlantic, all the way to Bridgetown, Barbados. I still remember arriving. We boarded the bus to ride to the village of Vauxhall where we were going to live. Grandmother decided it was time for me to start in the village school. Years later, I would know what an important gift my parents had given me with my early education in the schools of Barbados. If I speak and write easily now, that early education is the main reason. Granny gave me strength, dignity, and love. I learned from an early age that I was somebody.